believe in no God, no invisible man in the sky. But there is something more powerful than each of us, a combination of our efforts, a great chain of industry that unites us. But it is only when we struggle in our own interest that the chain pulls society in the right direction. The chain is too powerful and too mysterious for any government to guide. Any man who tells you different either has his hand in your pocket or a pistol to your neck.
Will the circle be unbroken by and by and by? Isabel.
Hello, my name is Hamid Rezani Kufar and this is Gameology Conversations. In this holy episode, I've spoken with the hero of my life, the great Ken Levine, who created the BioShock series. I know, wow. Not much has been said in the conversation, so I cut it short here. Let's baptize our minds with the voices of holiness. How you doing, sir?
I'm good. How are you, Hamid?
I'm excellent. I feel like the luckiest guy in the world. I mean, if I die, I'll happily say I spoke with with the hero of my life. So that's how I feel.
Oh, they say to never meet your heroes. They're always disappointing.
No. Yeah. So, let me start with a story, a true story. A very personal story. It might be boring for people, but it's very important for me to tell you this. It's going to be a long speech, but I have to tell it.
You tell it.
Yeah. When I was a kid, before I learned to read, I was always wondering about books. I didn't know what was in them. All I knew was it must be something magical because people would sit for hours and stare at them with a face full of emotions. So when I finally learned to read, I was so excited that I went to my dad's library, huge collection of books. Among all these political, philosophical history books, I saw a strange book, a very different book, a book with pictures of cartoon animals on it. It was odd. Why is Daddy reading children's book? I looked at the title and it was Animal Farm by George Orwell. So I started to read it right away, turning pages, and I'm lost. What is this book? It's a book with talking animals, so I'm kind of pretty sure it's a children's book, but it feels not. It feels that I'm not supposed to read it. Anyway, I finished the book, and I thought the last pages of the book was missing. I was like, what was that about? Where's the rest of the story? Anyway, months later, I read an old article in Daddy's newspaper again about the subtext of that story, and I was shocked. All those times I was reading a book with political and philosophical subtext, and after that I felt powerful. I felt like a grown man. When others were reading Cinderella, I was reading Orwell, so that felt amazing. And after that was...
How old were you?
I don't know. I think 8, 9, probably.
Wow.
And after that, I was always saving money to buy more Orwells, reading 1984, and I'm like kidding at Disneyland. The fact is, while reading these books, I felt respected. I felt like a grown man. More than anything, I felt like I know the truth behind everything. I felt more I read, more I get close to the lighthouse in the middle of a dark and deceiving ocean. So I decided to do the same. I decided to be a storyteller. I went to film school with a dream of adapting 1984 in a feature film, with a dream of creating utopias just to be able to make them dystopias. So skip forward, and I read somewhere in an interview with a guy who's making a game called BioShock. Now, why is that interesting? Because I'm a video game fan? Yes, there must be one reason. Because it looks amazing, absolutely undeniable. Or is it the fact that I read the guy who made this was influenced by George Orwell and Ayn Rand? So when it was released, I played the game. I had a very familiar feeling. I felt like a child being treated like a grown man again. I felt like a child seeing the truth in the dark of the ocean. I felt like a child being so inspired I decided to be someone more. And what I did, I made a plaque on my wall that said, "What would Ken Levine do?" And that plaque changed my life. I became a game designer. Also, I became the one who never gets tired of writing screenplays. So one day he can inspire the next generation. Now, there is no more plaque on my wall, but a mirror to remind myself, who am I going to be? What am I going to do? So, sir, you gave me hope. You gave me inspiration. You gave me purpose. And you taught me to choose the impossible. Thank you for everything.
Well, I sounds like you're the one doing the work and I'm the one getting the credit. But thank you very much for saying that. I'm flattered to be included in the company of Orwell. But I think that's the brilliance of that book is a young woman can read that book, and understand it, and the ideas it talks about you'll be wrestling with till you're old, I think.
Yeah. That's amazing. So let's talk about you, sir. I'm very curious to know more about your childhood because, I kind of believe an individual is a reflection of his or her surrounding in a community or I'm so sorry. Let's do it again.
No problem.
So you were talking about the inspirations you got when you were just a teenager.
Yeah, probably very similar to yours. I was really drawn to certain pieces of fiction.
Yeah.
There was a bunch of stuff that came out when I was a kid, like Logans Run and Rollerball and Planet of the Apes. All these are dystopian stories.
Yeah.
And I was really attracted to this. I don't really know why, but I was drawn to them. With Logan's Run, I saw the movie and I read the book several times. And I wasn't a big reader as a kid, so that was sort of one of the books that got me into reading. I think you were ahead of the curve with me.
Yeah.
I read that book like 5 times, and
Wow.
something about it, just sort of somebody who could imagine an entire society, was very appealing to me.
Yeah.
And then I didn't come to Orwell probably till high school, and I probably read Animal Farm first, and that was really, obviously the kind of political ideas he was dealing with there were far more sophisticated than Logan's Run,
Yeah.
and Brave New World and stuff like that. So yeah, it was kind of fiction I was always really drawn to.
Yeah. I heard in a conference that you said ideas are rubbish. Anyone can come up with ideas. What matters is execution of ideas. Looking back at your games, it's amazing. I mean, BioShock, for example, is full of different ideas. Each have potential of becoming a standalone game. So the question is, how do you make sure a good idea is going to be executed well, and how do you make sure they work together perfectly?
I think the key is I don't know if there's an answer to that question except like trial and error. With all the ideas, the important thing that we always try to keep in mind is that we're making something for an audience, and eventually somebody who's not us or the team members or our family or friends or our parents are going to play it, and they're not going to have any reason to like our thing more than the other thing. Mm-hmm. We're asking a lot from people, man. We're asking them for their money and their time, which is very, very valuable. So we always try to put ourselves in the position of the person on the receiving end. We only have one chance with them. We better do our best to get their attention, and that requires you to sort of look at your own work in a different way than, I had a great idea, or I wrote a great story. And ideas and stories are just building blocks for the thing you eventually deliver, and you have to be very willing to be a critic of your own work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, I believe a story in a video game must not be told. It must be experienced. And that makes the games different than other medias. I mean, I'm a game designer and a filmmaker too, but I can't stand cutscenes and stories being told like cinema. We have a jewel of gameplay in video games, and yet we are trying to rip off Hollywood with cheap, awfully directed cutscenes. But you work differently, and that I think makes it impossible to make say a film adaptation of BioShock equally good as the game. Because if the Bioshock was a film, we would probably say this to the hero of the story: go kill the Big Daddy, because A, we'll watch a cool action scene, B, you're the protagonist, and you're not going to die in the middle of the story. But in the game, you have a choice. You fail, you're going to repeat it until you get past it. And here, the option of leaving the Big Daddy in peace is much more understandable. And the choices and the experiences we have in a game will eventually make it different than other medias. So story-wise, games are experienced, not just as stories. A very fresh example is Playdead's Inside. No dialogue, no voices, no bullshit, and it feels like the best story ever told. So how do you use the possibility of gameplay in order to tell an engaging and compelling story without the use of goddamn boring cutscenes?
I think bringing up Inside is a very valuable addition to the conversation, because Inside, I think, is the best game I played probably in a couple of years, and it uses the medium extremely well, in the sense that it the entire goal of the game, that you're never told what it is, but basically it's the right side of the screen is more attractive than the left side of the screen for you, right?
Exactly.
You're trying to get from the right side of the screen. The left side of the screen is less attractive. Yeah, that's what I said. You're trying to get from the left side to the right side. Mm-hmm. And that's a thing that can only exist in a game, right? That you have this sort of notion of moving forward is preferable to staying where you are. And the fact that they do so little, I think there's a lot to learn from films there too. Like, have you seen a film Under the Skin?
Yeah, absolutely. Great movie.
They tell you very little in that movie as well. They sort of leave a lot to your imagination. And I tend to love stories like that. Go back to Kubrick and Paul Thomas Anderson and filmmakers like that. My favorite kind of filmmakers, because they leave a lot. They don't tell you what to think. They just sort of present a lot of interesting ideas. And Inside, very gave you a lot of leeway for you to say what's happening here, especially the ending, which I think a lot of people found confounding, which I found brilliant. Yeah. But I'm not sure I'd agree with you that something's not adaptable. I think adaptation's the key word. You can turn BioShock into a symphony, right? It would be a very different piece of work, because different artists. I'm convinced of one thing. I'm convinced that there's an artistic impulse inside of people, right? Yeah. And how that comes out of us is different depending on the person. Some people turn that artistic impulse into a piece of music. I'm not a musician, so I don't know how to turn an idea into a piece of music. But if you're Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead, who also did the score of There Will Be Blood.
Yeah.
You'll have an idea about how to get that idea out, right? And he scored that, and P.T. Anderson would have a different idea of how to get the idea out, which will be his component of the film, which the direction and the writing and the working with the actors. I believe the artistic impulse is the same. It just comes out of people in different ways. Mm-hmm. So I think of this. You can think of the same thing about a piece of art that you just have to figure out as a screenwriter. Say if you're writing a movie of that, how is that artistic impulse channeled into a film versus a game? Yeah.
And it's funny you mentioned Paul Thomas Anderson, because aside, I had 4 or 5 plaques on my wall, and it was what would Ken Levine do? What would Paul Thomas Anderson do? What would Christopher Nolan do? What would Hans Zimmer do? What would Terrence Malick do?
You set your sights. Those other guys, you set your sights pretty high. Those are some pretty powerful creators up there. Well, I mean, look, I think you mentioned that you took those plaques down. I think that is a good thing to do, because at the end of the day, those are those people can inspire you. You know, they can give you sort of directions in how to think about problems. But at the end of the day,
Yeah,
what people are going to be drawn to is how you solve those problems.
exactly. Now, your games deal with a lot of political, philosophical issues. How do you insert them in your games? Is the story based on those factors, or they come along as you write? How's the process working?
I think in the best case, you're working with character. And, you know, like if you look at Andrew Ryan, you can't separate Andrew Ryan as a person from Andrew Ryan as a political figure, right? Because his response to pain is political, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to create a society that is going to protect me from that pain. And I think that's what most people are trying to do with politics. They don't get into politics because, well, I mean, if you're honestly getting into politics, you're not just trying to look for, you know, bribes or whatever. You don't get into politics because you like politics. You're getting in as a response to something that's distressing you or upsetting you. And, you know, we're all wrestling with different kinds of, you know, demons and some, you know, the expression of the wrestling for me is artwork. The expression of the wrestling for other people is going into politics. And so I tend to write about, I have no interest in going into politics. I would find it, I like making politics in the games because I can sort of have a lot of control in the games. I'd be very frustrated with the lack of control you have in the real world of politics. It's not a world I ever was interested in. But I think that you start with the character, you start with like, well, what's that person's problem? And what's their solution? I've chosen characters whose solutions tend to be political.
Yeah. Now, you ever fear that your game become too complicated and sophisticated to understand? I mean, people might say, "Screw it! I have to read books to understand this."
Do I have that fear?
Yeah.
No, I mean, I don't think. I think the ideas as presented are. You could play BioShock and really just view it as a cool dungeon crawl, you know?
Yeah.
With cool art, characters and stuff. I don't think you really have to walk away, you know, struggling with the issues of, you know, capitalism and the extreme and the extremes of capitalism or the limitations of communism or the or any of those things. I think you could just play it as an experience. I think you won't get the full value out of it. But I think that there's, you know, the goal is that I think if you have to enjoy a piece of art on every single level the author intended to it, it's not really an effective piece of art because you really have to assume there's a broad audience that's going to be attracted to different parts of what you're doing. Yeah.
Imagine I want to tell a story and I have some intentions. Of course, the main goal is to tell a greater story, but I want to express my ideologies through this story. I want to talk to people behind it. How do I do it without being so blunt?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean.
I mean, how can I talk about how can I talk about something else in my story without getting caught? For example, talking about capitalism, for example.
Well, I think the interesting thing is, you know, is that you have to start from a position of story. Exactly what you just said. That at the end of the day, there has to be a story to follow. Animal Farm is brilliant because you could read it. Mm-hmm. Like you said, as a kid, it's about a bunch of animals who stage a revolution at the farmhouse, and that's a story. Like you can tell somebody that story, they're like, "Oh, that sounds like an interesting story." Like, what if the animals took over the farm? What would happen? And you don't really necessarily have to understand anything about Trotsky and Lenin and Stalin and all that to understand that story is really about them, or even about politics on a larger issue than just the Russian Revolution. I knew nothing about the Bolshevik Revolution when I was a kid, when I read that book. I still took something away from the story just as an example of people and how, even though they're animals, how people don't live up to their own ideals they create. That it's very, very hard. You create a system of ideology and it's hard to live up to it. I don't think that's not just true for politics. I mean, I have this expression. Do you have the term skin in the game in Iran in English?
No.
What that means is, what if you believe something, what are you willing to give up for it? Mm-hmm. you think you see a lot of political figures who talk about X, Y, or Z, but they want other people to change, and they're not willing to give up things for themselves. And the Russian Revolution is a great example.
Yeah.
It was all about a worker revolution, and then suddenly you find, the people in power are living in, have special privileges. When the revolution's supposed to be about the abolition of privilege.
Yeah.
And so I think that there's there's stories you can tell that don't really have to even people know them to be political.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they're still political. Like, for instance, you could talk about morality. Like, people will talk about homosexuality, and they'll say, I think this is how other people should act in their bedrooms. But meanwhile, they wouldn't want anybody coming to their bedroom and telling them how to act.
Yeah.
That's an example of skin in the game. That you want other people to change, but you're not willing to change yourself.
Yeah. Have you ever got into trouble because of the content of your games?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to piss people off always. I think that our first game, BioShock, the first game, dealt with infanticide, with killing of children, and the most people who react to these things tend to be the game's press, not the actual public themselves.
Yeah.
I think the public is actually fairly willing to accept a lot of challenging material. I think the press tends to worry that, they're going to get. I got so many questions on BioShock 1 about the little sister harvesting from the press. And when the game came out, I think I read one article. Well, I never had I had one person the entire time, actual person, come up and talk to me about how that bothered them.
Oh.
It became a non-issue. People understood it was a metaphor. And people are a little smarter than I think the press might give them credit for.
Yeah. Now, I've been a game designer for years now, and I've designed some successful games. I've made good money out of them. But ironically, I've never designed a game where I can tell my personal stories. And unfortunately, in Iran, we mostly make games for mobile devices, and I fucking hate mobile games. In my opinion, they're not experiences because they're being played in Subway with a bad breath of a homeless guy standing beside you, and they're being played without sound, being played on small screens, and you're in the middle of a game, and suddenly a message comes, don't forget to buy broccolis, and it ruins the game. And they're casual as hell, and they're the games for having good times, not meaningful times. So anyway, I'm in this limbo, and recently I'm moving more toward my filmmaking career because I think I have more freedom to tell the stories there, and it's a shame because video games are a great place to tell the stories. So, what would you do if you were in my shoes when your head is full of experiences, but there's no ink in the pen when it's really hard to make your dream project?
Well, I mean, so I sort of have to start by asking you a question.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly entirely clear on what sort of like constraints there are in Iran from, and there may be none. I don't actually know. Like, as a creator, do you have governmental constraints of what you can and can't work on?
Yeah, we have, but that's not the issue.
It's mostly a market issue.
Yeah. The PC market is not very good, but mobile market is absolutely great. So.
Let me ask you a question. If you're making PC games for distribution on Steam, what's to keep you from doing that?
The cost of making a PC game, and the problems we have releasing the game outside the country. Here we can simply just make a small game and have a lot of money out of it, but international market is really hard. And it needs money to make that, actually. No one going to take risk to do that.
So I think the answer I would give you, and again, I'm sorry, because I don't want to sound glib here, because we all live in different places with different sets of economic challenges and government challenges, et cetera, publishing challenges. But I would say that the best trick to do is to fool people. And by that I mean, to create things that people don't actually know are political.
Yeah.
Because people hear politics and they get turned off, right? Like if
Yeah.
BioShock, I think what made BioShock work is with the opening of the game was exciting and compelling and mysterious and strange and weird. And you didn't really even know that much about the politics at the very beginning. It starts with a plane crash, right? We try to draw in right at the start. It's a Robinson Crusoe story. You know that story about the guy shipwrecked on the desert island?
Exactly.
So it was drawing from a long tradition of certain types of stories. And I think that if we had put on the box, if the game had been called, Objectivist Underwater City, it wouldn't have done as well as if it were called BioShock. Because politics make people nervous because they associate a lot of negative things with them. So I think that, and same with Animal Farm, right? It's called Animal Farm. It's not called an examination of the fragility of ideological systems. It's called Animal Farm. And you picked it, if it had been called that and it didn't have pigs and donkeys on the cover, you probably wouldn't have picked it up when you were a little kid.
Exactly.
So I would say that there's, even as long as, if you want to work in those spaces, you have to figure out a way to communicate to people in a way that's, you sort of go in the back door a little bit where they can't see you coming, and you have to surprise people with the messages by leading with entertainment first. And that's always the case. The most transformative art is almost always really good and entertaining and high quality.
Yeah.
So start with that. What is a great story I can tell? And then worry about getting the message across.
Yeah.
But start with a great story. And if you do that and say, how do I lead with the story rather than the ideology of what I want to get across? How do I lead with my story?
Yeah. Thank you. That's a great answer. So I'm wondering, when you're hiring people, what qualifications are you looking for?
It depends on where, what you're doing. For us now, we're a much smaller team. And so our hiring is really based upon being somebody we're a very senior team of people. Yeah. And so people who are rather senior, who don't need any management, because we don't really have a management structure anymore. We really just depend upon people to do a lot of their self-management. And we have some management, but the goal is really that people can be quite self-led in our group. But when we were doing Infinite, we needed we needed a lot more people. So we needed a much broader range of talent types. So we tend to look for people who are comfortable working in an environment where, they're comfortable criticizing and being criticized as well. People who don't think they have all the answers, who are open to being wrong. People who are obviously skilled and have the sort of technical skills, but also are always willing to sort of step back from their own work and say, can I make it better? Yeah. Can I make it better? How can I make this better? Because there is no piece of work that couldn't be made better. It's all a question of time, right? Yeah. At some point, you have to put your pencils down. But until that point happens, any work can be improved upon. Any work, anybody's work.
Yeah. Let's talk about BioShock. Bless your ears for selecting Armin Shimmerman for Andrew Ryan. The guy is a legend. How did you find out that he's going to be the voice of Andrew Ryan?
We just had auditions and, open auditions. There's a service, they have services here where you basically you send out an audition material and people just read from it and record it and send it to you. And I heard Armin, and I was sort of somewhat familiar with him from Buffy the Vampire Slayer he was on, but he playing a very different role, and also Deep Space Nine. I wasn't that familiar with Deep Space Nine, but it was a very different part. And I heard his voice, and it was Armin's voice is actually pitched about, I believe, a couple of two or three semitones down in BioShock. Yeah. So his voice is actually somewhat higher than that, and it doesn't really sound like Andrew Ryan when he's at his normal pitch. But there was something about Armin and his conviction with the material and his understanding of the material that drew me to him. So I went to Emily, our sound designer at the time, and said, well, why don't we try pitching him down and see how he sounds, and we pitch him down. And there's always some concern because when you pitch somebody down, that could actually degrade the quality of the voice, and it starts to sound artificial. But it worked okay, and he became, it was very clear very quickly that Armin was the guy for that part. That owned that part. It's kind of hard to think of a different voice in that role. He needed to be the center. You don't even meet the guy until the game is almost done, and so he has to. That presence of voice has to carry you through. Through for a long way. There was a play I was in high school. Pretty famous play. It became a TV show called The Odd Couple. And there's a technique that Neil Simon uses in it, where for the first sort of act of the play, there's a poker game and everybody's talking about one of the characters. Are you familiar with The Odd Couple?
Oh no.
It's basically a story about a sort of classic story about two divorced men moving together. One's super clean and super uptight, and one's super messy and super relaxed, and how they clash with each other, right?
Yeah.
And it's a comedy. And they spend the first act talking about the clean guy, but you never see him. He doesn't appear till the second act. But they set him up so well, by the time he appears, you're prepped for this guy to come in, and the audience is heightened to who he is. Yeah. Their senses are heightened. And Andrew Ryan's sort of like that way. You keep hearing about him. He's only in one scene in the entire game, basically. He's in the game for like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
In terms of him being a physical presence in the game. But that 5 minutes, we had hours to set him up. And that was a really interesting experiment of you not meeting this guy until the very end. But I think that helped. I think that helped to make his impact feel very meaningful when you finally did meet him.
Yeah. It's great because, like you said, he's more of a voice than a character to see, to interact, and what a character he is. Let's talk about Gary Shyman. How did you know he's the man for the job? I'm serious. I'm serious. BioShock soundtrack is something really special and recognizable, and I think a lot of it comes to you letting the composer go wild.
Oh, I wouldn't give a lot of credit to myself here. I think Emily found him, the sound designer found him, and I was actually opposed to. I didn't like game scores, because game scores tend to be just music that played in the background repeating at that point. And Emily and Gary sort of convinced me that we could actually score this thing much more like a film. And once I heard, I think the first thing I heard from him might have been that sort of descent to rapture music. And I could feel the ocean, I could feel the weight of the ocean when I heard that music, and I could feel the sort of mystery. And, Gary's score is sort of inseparable from the experience of playing that game. So I'm grateful that they were both patient with me and helping demonstrate. Was Emily Ridgway and Gary Shyman both demonstrate to me the value of having that kind of score in the game.
Yeah, amazing score. Now, what was the last inspiring game you played, and why was it inspiring?
I get inspired in different ways. Some games inspire me with their gameplay, like XCOM 2. I've been playing a lot of that again, and I just love the gameplay, and I love how much choice it gives you. I think the last game that sort of inspired me from this is taking you on a journey, sit back and sort of be amazed by the journey was Inside, like you said. It was like being transported to another world, so I think that was the last time I got really drawn into something like that.
Yeah. Very well, sir. You know how much I respect and love you, and it was a dream come true for me. And I'm proud of myself to finally speak to my hero after many years. I look back and I see the 16 years old version of myself playing BioShock and dreaming of talking to the guy who made this. And it's really a dream come true, and you made it possible. For years, I've been looking up to you, telling myself how to become a game designer and a storyteller like him. Now I look up to you and say, how can I be a man, honest and humble like him? Thank you, sir. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. I mean, I really appreciate the time, and I'm not sure how to respond to those very beautiful sentiments, but thank you.
Your being is a beautiful response to that. Thank you so much.
In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys.